Welcome into the Bear Report Roundtable series. We're going to start doing these for you Chicago Bears fans to break down the latest with the Chicago Bears ahead of big events. First up is free agency. I'm your host, Zach Pearson. I'm joined by Usaid Coach and Andrew Freeman. We're going to give our free agency preview a week early as it kicks off next week, but Tuesday the 7th is the last day for franchise tagging. Monday here, the 6th, right after the combine, was a big day with a lot of activity. And I'll go right to you, Andrew. What was kind of your biggest move today from what we saw out there in the NFL world?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of activity even going back further over the last week or so. I mean, the Titans have been, and Rams really have both been, doing a lot to kind of rebuild that roster, moving on from some guys, save some cap space. The Saints, doing their thing where every year they just kick a bunch of money into the future, and it seems like the salary cap just doesn't exist for them in many cases. And I think we got to start there with the Saints, like the big move for Derek Carr. It's kind of the first down of the fall at the quarterback position. We still don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that's probably going to be the next one, but Lamar Jackson. And then you look at some of these free agents like Jimmy Garoppolo. What happens now with him? What do some of these other teams do to address quarterback? We know that the Jets were heavily invested in, Derek Carr, but they're also waiting to kind of hear what happens with Aaron Rodgers as well. So, yeah, a lot of interesting things from the quarterback market standpoint on the Derek Carr signing. Immediately after the Derek Carr signing, you have Geno Smith signing his extension with the Seahawks for 3 years. There's talks about Daniel Jones, the Giants trying to get a deal done before the tag deadline tomorrow, and we'll see what happens there. It's certainly a deal could get done, but maybe doesn't. They have to tag Daniel Jones, and from there, a bunch of other dominoes fall from moving on to some of the other free agents set to hit the market this year. So I'd say that's the biggest news. And it gives some clarity to the quarterback situation in the NFC South because that entire division needs to fill quarterback spots. Like none of them have a quarterback. Well, now the Saints do, and that gives them a leg up on some of these other teams in the division for that division where it's not going to be a good division next year. It was a terrible division this past season. Tampa Bay with Tom Brady retiring, they needed a quarterback now. The Carolina Panthers and Atlanta Falcons are both going to be in a situation where I think they're going to be looking to trade up for a quarterback in this year's draft, which certainly helps out the Bears because we all know that they're going to be looking to trade down with these teams. And there's been a lot of talk that a deal could be done soon for the number one overall pick for the Bears, with one of these teams looking to trade up and give them a massive haul to get Bryce Young or one of these other young quarterbacks in this upcoming draft.
You say, what was your biggest move today, the most impactful one?
I mean, it has got to be the Seahawks going ahead and signing Geno Smith to that big extension. It's a 3-year, $150 million deal. There is, I believe, $52 million that he's making in the first year of the deal alone, which is, again, quite a massive cap hit for a guy who was a starter at one point and then a backup for many years. Now he's kind of back in the starting role for the Seattle Seahawks. That's a big move simply because not only does it kind of set some precedents for Daniel Jones' deal, which for those of you guys that are wondering, if you listen to Picks for Polls, you know that Andrew and I agree Daniel Jones is not worth $45 million a year. But the point is if you're Daniel Jones, you're looking at that and you're saying, hey, if this guy got that based on one really solid year of production and many years as a backup, then I surely have to be in the same price range. But that Geno Smith signing, man, I mean, it's just one of those where, the Seahawks got it done. Credit to them. Andrew, you kind of hit on the Derek Carr saga. That's a mega deal right there, too. I believe it's like 4 years, $150 or $60 million. It's one of those where, the Saints are a team. They've taken their swings on these veteran quarterbacks since Drew Brees has retired, right? They went after Jameis Winston. Not an experiment that really worked out. You had Taysom Hill there. He's never really been a serious contender for the future. Much of the hype around him was when Sean Payton was around. And is Taysom still serviceable for them? Yeah, but he's not like a true all-around quarterback that you can build your team around. So the Saints are doing this specifically because they know a couple things. Number one, they've got a solid group of receivers. You've got Michael Thomas, Chris Olave there. Alvin Kamara is a running back. It's a defense that's good but not great. They're hoping that just a change of scenery for Derek Carr can kind of help them figure things out and get back to relevance. But you're right. I mean, that entire division is just a mess top to bottom. You've got the Panthers, who could possibly go ahead and who are going to, I think, trade up for a quarterback. You've got the Bucks, who seem to be in a blow it up mode and let's just rebuild, but they don't really want to acknowledge it. And then you've got the Atlanta Falcons, who have too many needs to justify sacrificing a first round pick in 2024 and 25 to trade up for a quarterback. So there's a lot of movement that still kind of has to take place here before the dust even settles. And even when the dust settles, there's going to be another wave of moves that takes place with free agency around the corner.
Yeah, let's kind of get into the free agency part. And I think we could all agree, the Chicago Bears have a lot of needs. I mean, there's just from top to bottom. I mean, this roster has a lot of needs. They have to get better at a lot of key positions. For this one, Andrew, I'll go with you. What are your three biggest needs for the Bears to address in free agency?
Yeah, I mean, you have to start in the trenches because both sides of the ball, defensive line, offensive line, need to be completely reworked this offseason. It may not happen entirely in free agency, but you know that they're going to have to be aggressive there. Coming in with $100 million in cap space, like they're going to have to spend a lot of money here. And I would expect that Ryan Poles, he's going to spend most of that money in addressing these two key areas. The defensive line is just, I mean, it was a joke last year. They couldn't get after the quarterback. They couldn't stop the run effectively. There's no long-term piece on this defensive line right now that you can point to and say he's definitively someone that they can build around here. They have some young guys like Travis Gibson, going into the final year of his rookie contract. I'm not sure if he's a long-term guy. He's certainly more of a rotational piece at best at this point. Dominic Robinson had some flashes as a rookie last year, 5th round pick, but he was always going to be a developmental guy. He didn't really do much with more opportunities as the year went on. And then after that, I mean, the edge group is just not very good. I mean, they cut Elkany Muhammad 1 year into his deal for a reason. Like, he just didn't show up last year as a free agency signing. So it's barren at that edge spot, and it's even more barren at that defensive tackle spot because we know how important it is for this defense. I mean, what was the first signing that they tried to go after last offseason? It was, Larry Ogunjobi to fit that 3-tech position.
3-tech.
Yeah. And, that deal ended up falling through for them. I'm not sure if that would have been a good deal for them, but it shows that they really wanted to address that spot. Justin Jones right now is their 3-tech in name only right now, but he was more of a stopgap because they had to pivot. I'm not sure if they view him as anything more than just a guy who's going to be here this year, and then they're going to move on from him moving forward. So they're going to have to address that. I mean, there are some guys that would fit that role perfectly in this free agency class, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, they're going to have to rework this entire defensive line. They need 4 new starters. They need additional depth at that defensive line. Like, they need to throw a bunch of resources there this offseason. And the same goes for the offensive line, where you can argue that they need up to as many as 3 new starters, which is tough to do in one offseason. But there isn't many safe locks in that group either. Like Braxton Jones, I feel like the front office is higher on him than a lot of people outside the front office in Bears Twitter is right now, because he certainly showed some flashes as a rookie last year. Tevin Jenkins is an interesting situation. When he's on the field, he's great, but can you depend on him to be on the field is the question with him. But beyond those two, like Cody Whitehair, he's definitely not a long-term piece. I think moving forward, they're probably look to upgrade up off of him. But the 2 glaring spots that they need to upgrade, and they can do that in free agency, I think, is right tackle and center. I think those are 2 areas where they kind of have to hit those 2 spots, and they can do that within the next week or so here because, there are some right tackles on the market that I think are going to be, guys that they can go after here. And there are going to be some centers available as well that they could look to upgrade if they're looking to move off of Lucas Patrick, which I know that, may not be the case, but we'll see what happens there.
Building the trenches. That's pretty much what, Ryan Poles has preached since, he got here in his introductory press conference. And I think, when we talk about surrounding Justin Fields with talent and surrounding and getting better on the offense, I think, we think wide receiver, we think, going out and getting a running back, Saquon Barkley, or getting a tight end, something like that. But I think building the offensive line was probably the biggest key. I mean, how many times did Justin Fields have to tuck it and run it so many times, or was under pressure last year because of the offensive line? Solidifying that, getting your 5 starters in sync early on in the offseason is probably a priority for me. And looking at the defensive line too, like building those trenches, man, like you said, they need a whole new front 7 in my eyes. I think, you can have Justin Jones as the backup. You can have, Jack Sanborn as a cheap linebacker. Maybe they bring back Nicholas Morrow because he's familiar with the defense now. But they need a game record on that defensive line. They need a game record on that front seven. Worst team in the league in sacks. Worst team in the league in pressures, second to last in rushing yards allowed. It was just a mess. So I'm with you. I think building the trenches, those would be my biggest needs. The next one you say is for you. And we saw last year with the Bears going after Byron Pringle, going after Matthew Adams, going after Al-Quddin Muhammad, guys that are familiar with Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. Do you think that'll be the case this year? And, if so, is it smart for the Bears to kind of go out there and do that? Or should they be kind of hesitant just because they're familiar doesn't mean they're a good fit?
I think there's a fine line between both. You look at last off season; it was kind of they had to go after these second and third tier free agents simply because they didn't necessarily have much money to spend anyway. And then on top of that, you were just churning the roster, and you're all like, let's just go with these low risk, high reward type of players that you have to hope you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, basically, in the sense that those guys are going to come in, they're going to stay healthy, they're going to go ahead and produce. This year, though, it's a really different story. Why? Because you have what people around the league view to be an ascending big time quarterback. You've basically got 2 more years of control minus the 5th-year option for Justin Fields. And so now it's all about how do you maximize that talent, because at some point, I mean, you're gonna have to start paying some of the guys that were on the roster this past season. So when it comes to free agency, like the Bears need to be aggressive. These guys like Bobby O'Creery, I'm probably butchering that. There's Zaire Franklin, I believe, both of those guys linebackers with the Colts. Those guys are free agents. Don't just sign guys because they're familiar with your defensive scheme. Okay, there is some benefit in doing that, but at the end of the day, if you were to ask me, hey, who are you going to bring back? Would it be a guy like a Nicholas Morrow or start fresh with one of the Colts linebackers? I would lean Nick Morrow simply because there is a level of continuity there. And again, the front office and coaching staff just love to use the word culture, right? We've heard that all the time. But then the picture gets so muddy when you kind of talk about the trenches. Why? Because we saw Frank Clark's not coming back to the Chiefs. Well, I shouldn't say he's not coming back. I mean, there's a possibility he ends up back there on a rework deal, but they just kind of let him go to save some money. You've got Orlando Brown Jr. as well as Andrew Wiley, both offensive linemen with the Chiefs. Those guys are hitting the open market. I mean, in a sense, if there's an opportunity to upgrade, you go ahead and you take it no matter what the cost is. Because this is a team, like, they've got so much money. They've got the first overall pick. They can't necessarily afford to just say, well, we're not going to go after this guy because we're not familiar with him. In a sense, there's a benefit because you have additional information that other front offices and personnel departments and just pro scouts around the league may not necessarily have. So it's like I started with, right? It's this fine line between we should go after them, but again, some of these guys like an O'Creery, they're not necessarily going to be game changers at all that are going to significantly alter the way your defense looks.
We talked about the needs the Bears have. There's a lot. I kind of want to do a little game here. It's going to be our next segment with the top targets, players to kind of stay away from here. I'm looking at the PFF, Pro Football Focus, top 100 free agent target list. I'll say one. We'll alternate. I'll go with Andrew first. I'll go, then you say, and then I'll go third. We'll do kind of a couple of these. I'm not going to pick players. Obviously, number one on this list would be Lamar Jackson. I'm not going to say him. That's just obvious. I mean, it's obvious. Geno Smith. That was obvious. So I'll go first here with a need that the Bears have. And Andrew, I'm sorry, Andrew will go first. I'll say it. When I look at this free agent, Andrew, is this a top target or is this a player to stay away from? And that is Kansas City Chiefs offensive tackle Orlando Brown.
Stay away. I think Orlando Brown, and there's many reasons for this, but I think the biggest reason, I think he's going to be looking to reset the tackle market, which again, the Bears could afford at this point. But if you're going to reset the tackle market, you got to think of the type of player that you're bringing in to do that. And Orlando Brown, he's a solid player, but I think he's a little bit more of a name more than game at this point, if that makes any sense. A guy who started off his career as right tackle, moved over to the left side for the Chiefs because he wanted to get, the respect of being left tackle, eventually looking forward to his payday. And Brown, he's a guy that he kind of has similar issues to some of the other offensive linemen we've seen for the Bears, where on this roster right now, we're a good run blocker, very physical player, not very good in pass protection, doesn't really have quick feet. And the biggest concern for me is, scheme fit wise, and the type of guys that Ryan Poles has brought in here over the last offseason or so, or last year or so, I should say. You look at the type that they brought in, they look for lighter, quicker, more athletic, more explosive linemen that can get out into space, get to the second level, and are just comfortable running that outside zone Shanahan style scheme that Luke Getsy kind of runs here in Chicago. And that is not Orlando Brown. He's great in a phone booth in the run game, just that mammoth size that he has to kind of overwhelm defensive ends. But he's not a guy that you're comfortable getting on the move, getting in space. If he were a better pass protector, a more natural pass protector, maybe you could justify it. But he's not a lockdown pass protector. He's not a great fit for what they want to do in the run game. And I just think, with the money that he's going to be demanding on the open market, I just think it makes a lot of sense for the Bears to go in another direction here. And they also have the issue of, you drafted Braxton Jones, who showed some things last year. I think they're committed to at least giving him another year of development to kind of see what he has. Now you have the issue of, if you pay Orlando Brown Jr. and bring him in, do you keep him at left tackle and move Braxton Jones to right tackle and basically start his development all over again? Or do you move Orlando Brown back to right tackle, where he specifically wanted out of Baltimore because he didn't want to play there, in order to keep Braxton Jones at left tackle? Like, there are many factors for why I think this wouldn't work. And to me, with all the right tackles on the market, I think it makes a lot more sense to go in a different direction.
Yeah, he's going to get a big payday. I don't think money is a problem with the Bears, but like you said, you could kind of maybe spend that elsewhere with, two guys instead of getting the one. Another, maybe not huge, I think, in free agency, because the class is so bad this year, is wide receiver. So you say for you, Jacoby Myers, wide receiver, is he a top target or a player to stay away from?
He is without a doubt a player to stay away from, and I've consistently held true to this belief. It's been something that I'm like, do not go after Jacoby Myers at all. Listen, every single year there seems to be kind of that one free agent that the Patriots are going to let go, who's coming off, a strong year or a strong 2 years. People label him as the next kind of game changer. The reality is that a lot of these Patriots players, right, they go other places and they just completely flop. I mean, the last time I remember a big name Patriots player signing with another team and leaving via free agency was cornerback JC Jackson. All right, Jacoby Myers is not the type of player that fits the Bears scheme whatsoever. You look at him in the context of production. I mean, he had 67 receptions, 804 yards last year. So really he produced like a high-end wide receiver 2, or you could even argue a wide receiver 3 in some offenses in this league. But the reality is that it's just one of those moves where he's going to get paid probably $22 million a year. He's going to get paid handsomely, but that does not mean it's the right move at all. I mean, in the context of the Bears, this is a team that needs a game changer at the wide receiver position. They already spent a second round draft pick on Chase Claypool and sort of made the investment for a guy that they believe can be a good player for them, but not necessarily someone you could label as like a true game changer. And if you want my honest thoughts on Chase Claypool, like when the Bears traded for him, we talked about him on the Picks for Polls podcast, and one of the things we said was he had a really good rookie year, but the last basically 2 seasons he was playing with the corpse of Ben Roethlisberger and then Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. So I'm not saying Chase can't be a guy that pops off, but there's no point in going ahead and bringing in a guy like Jacoby Myers just because it's a waste of money and it's just a waste of a roster spot too.
Yeah, I just, the wide receiver class is so bad, and you're gonna have to overpay for free agents. He's not someone I'd overpay with. I would be more excited or more, reasonable with the Bears going second round pick at wide receiver. If they could find one of those slot guys there, I would prefer that a lot more than Jacoby Myers. He has gotten better as the years have gone on. But at the same time, you're going to be overpaying for a big wide receiver. You paid a lot for Chase Claypool. Let's get a young guy in there. I think spending a second round pick is more reasonable in my eyes. Andrew, I'll go with you next now, and I'm going to give you another offensive lineman. Mike McGlinchy, former San Francisco 49ers right tackle.
Well, you know me and my offensive lineman. Love to talk about him all day long.
That's why I gave it to you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, Mike McGlinchey, I think he makes a lot of sense for the Bears. I talked to kind of alluded to him actually when talking about some of the right tackles available, but I think Mike McGlinchey is probably the top right tackle available on the market this year for a lot of reasons. I mean, former first round pick. I mean, I hate to be cliche, but he went to Notre Dame, guys. So I mean, by definition, he's a Chicago Bear at heart here. But no, I think he makes a lot of sense for what they want. And, coming from the San Francisco 49ers, we know that he's a perfect fit for what they want to do in this offense, in that wide zone scheme, getting offensive linemen in space on the move. You can do a lot of things with him in the run game. Pass protection is still, he's a mediocre pass protector, I think, at best. I wouldn't say at best. He's probably just solidly a mediocre pass protector at that right tackle position, which is fine if you're able to get good pass protection out of Braxton Jones next year. The only problem with those two is if you have two tackles that you kind of have to protect a little bit in pass protection, that does kind of limit you a little bit, or you just need to have such a good interior that you can kind of work around that. With that said, though, I think McGlinchey makes a lot of sense. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to break the bank necessarily. He's going to get paid, and he's going to get paid big time on the open market, especially from the Bears, and the Bears can afford that. But I don't think he's a guy who's going to be getting upwards of $22 million a year like a guy like Orlando Brown will get. He's probably going to be more in that 18, 17, $19 million range, which I think is reasonable for, a guy who's probably a top 10 right tackle in the NFL. And again, it's hard to say because right tackle, there's not many truly great right tackles and ones that are paid like left tackles essentially. But, McGlinchey, I think he's a very safe bet. You know what you're getting out of him. He's in the prime of his career. He's, other than like 1 year where he had some injury issues, he's been generally pretty durable for the 49ers. And I think he's a guy that would come in and just make an impact for you right away. Just a very solid, good player that you can help build this roster, not around, but help you, upgrade this roster and really upgrade this offense moving forward.
All right, you say for your final one, I'm going to give you kind of a curveball one here. Running back Saquon Barkley, if he does touch the open market, it's not guaranteed. I don't know what the Giants are doing with that whole situation, but Saquon Barkley, target or someone that the Bears should definitely stay away from.
This is polarizing, and I've kind of got a smile on my face right now because I tend to go back and forth with Saquon Barkley. On one hand, I'm not a fan of paying running backs big contracts at all, especially a guy who's 2 years removed from a torn ACL. But then on the other hand, the possibilities of the way that defensive coordinators are going to have nightmares in a backfield that features Justin Fields and Saquon Barkley, quite frankly, it's hard to ignore. I think with the way that the league is going, you're seeing a lot of pass heavy offenses, and you don't necessarily need, I think, this elite running game to go ahead and take games over. Like, you take games over because of your passing attack as well as great quarterback play, right? The Bears, I think, are on their way to having pretty damn good quarterback play, but I just don't see a reason for Saquon Barkley to be signed by this team. Like, if it ends up happening, I'll be like, all right, cool. They are really kind of looking to run the offense through Fields and Saquon, but personally, I would say just avoid it because you don't know how his knee's going to hold up. And quite frankly, like, this team has too many needs to justify kind of spending money and spending big money at that on a running back.
Yeah, the money part, I'm not thrilled about spending money on a running back. I think that's kind of the trend in the NFL is you just don't really do that anymore. That said, if you get to Saquon that we thought is going to be a generational talent, yeah, I could see it. I don't think it's going to happen. Like it's just like one of those things where it's kind of like, oh, okay, here's a rumor that the Bears have been tied to everyone because they have so much damn money, and money's not going to be a bad problem for them. But yeah, I just I would probably pass from Saquon Barkley. A couple of other guys I was going to mention. I think these are kind of obvious ones. Javon Hargrave was one that I think is just an obvious, like, with Deron Payne gone, like, that's your guy. That's That's the guy. Vermont Jones out of Denver. That's another one at the 3 technique. Like those, I think for me, those are easy yeses. You need someone there. And now with Payne gone, like I said, you got to find a way to land one of those two. So yeah, those were kind of the other two that I was kind of floating around out there. Obviously, we could talk about a Bobby Okwukwe from Indianapolis. He's young. I think he would be a fit if the Bears want to spend the money. I mean, they're going to have to spend the money somewhere. That's kind of the whole thing about this. And like I keep going back to, like, you're going to overpay. Everyone's going to overpay in the NFL these days. It's just how it is. The money's going up. The TV deals are going up. The salary cap goes up all the time. You're just going to overpay. Let's move on to our next topic. And I think this one's kind of interesting because I think there's a common duh answer, but I also don't think it's as duh and common as you think it is. And that's, will free agency dictate what the Bears do in the draft? You say, I'll go with you first.
Absolutely not. This is a team that has too many needs to sit here and say, hey, you sign a guy in free agency, whether it's first, second, or third wave. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about that position in the draft. Like, if you're the Bears, you have to go into free agency and you have to go into this offseason with the mindset that we've only got quarterback figured out as well as some pieces in our secondary. Other than that, like, if the opportunity is there to upgrade, make another upgrade, and just keep adding to a position, you need to go ahead and you need to continue to do that. Like, this is a team where if you were to rank some of their high needs going into free agency, I would tell you offensive line and defensive line are some of them. If they can land a Hargrave and a Draymond Jones on the D line, but then the opportunity to add a guy like a Will Anderson is there, I mean, let's be real. Any GM in the league would do so. Or some of the defensive linemen that just kind of popped off last week in the combine. Take a position like wide receiver, for example. You cannot sit here and tell me that you are fully confident with Mooney and Claypool going into 2023 as your wide receivers, and then just nothing but bones behind them. Like, if the opportunity is there to add a guy like a Jackson Smith to Jigba or a Rashee Rice, for example, Zay Flowers, even, you go ahead and you take it no matter what the situation and circumstances really are, because again, it's just there's too many needs across the board to sit here and really feel comfortable with where this roster is at. And it's like the same exact thing with linebacker. I mean, let's just say the Bears pursue Tremaine Edmonds in free agency. There's a linebacker like Jack Campbell from Iowa that's available in round 2. You know what? By all means, you go ahead and you take it, and you take that swing. Why? Because at this point, you're not just trying to figure out starters, like you're trying to figure out your depth.
Oh, I think we lost him. All right, Andrew, I'll go with you here. Will free agency dictate what the Bears do in the draft?
I think to a degree it will. It'll depend on, I think, first of all, what positions are they hitting primarily in free agency. So you brought up Javon Hargrave as one of the top free agents in the market. Jermon Jones is one of the top free agents in the market. I think if they get one of those 3 tech guys in free agency at the beginning of when things open up, and they get one of those guys that kind of solidify that spot. When you look at the top of the draft and some of the top players there, like obviously the Jalen Carr situation in general is iffy right now just because of the legal standpoint and whether the Bears would be interested in a player like that anyway. With that said, if they go out there and they get a 3 tech like Jones or Hargrave in free agency, do you even have the interest in drafting a guy like Carter High anyway? And you just shift over to addressing, edge is a big need for them, or trading out even further and getting an offensive lineman or a wide receiver, something like that. So I think it absolutely could dictate, how they kind of handle the top of the draft there. Now, in terms of like, do they want to get maybe a guy to develop into the building at the 3 techs position, maybe later on in the draft anyway? Like, certainly could be the case anyway. Like, there's no problem with double dipping at a spot, so that way you have a guaranteed strength at a position. I think the Eagles have kind of, been at the forefront of this, where, just doubling down, tripling down at positions in the trenches because they know that if they have a strength there at all times, that's going to give them a floor as a team where they feel pretty good about where they're at all times in the trenches there. So I definitely could see it where maybe they, draft a guy high anyway, even though they do address money, throw a lot of money at a guy in free agency at a specific spot. But generally, I think, especially at that defensive tackle position, I don't think they're going to want to double dip in terms of, spending high end resources at the same position, twice, so to speak. So if they're going to spending a lot of money on a guy, let's say like a right tackle in free agency, I don't think, drafting a tackle in the first round is going to be something that they're necessarily going to have high on their list, if that makes sense. Now, if they do miss out on a tackle, maybe that opens a door to getting a guy like Paris Johnson in the building or Peter Skoronski, if they see him as a tackle, or some of the other tackles available. So we'll just have to see who they get in the first wave, because the first wave, I think, is going to determine a lot about how they handle the top of this draft.
Yeah, see, I think the obvious answer is, if they do take a defensive tackle, they're not going to take Jalen Carter, something like that. I think they would double and triple down. Like, I think Ryan Poles is a guy that, man, if they landed, Javon Hargrave, and they drafted someone like Jalen Carter, and they went out and spent more money on another, defensive lineman or another 3 technique, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't advise doing that unless like the well just dries up. I think it makes sense there. I think you're right, though. Like, if you go out and get a Mike McGlinchy, right tackle, you're spending a lot of money. I don't think you're going to go out and get another big right tackle, another big left tackle just yet. I do think they might draft, like, if they fall out of that top 10, maybe they go after a first rounder. But, like, I don't know. It's just like, for me, I'm not saying either of you are wrong or anything like that. Like, I just think Ryan Poles, man. Like, I think he's like, yeah, like, we have so many damn needs, and I have to build through the trenches. I'm going to double up. Like, I'm doubling up on anything I can. Ideally, my dream is like you land Hargrave, you land Jones, you somehow get Will Anderson, and then kind of maybe add another lineman down in the draft or something like that. I think that would kind of make a lot of sense. All right, my final one here. It's kind of a 2-parter, and it's going to be your bold predictions for the Bears in free agency. And then give me the one player the Chicago Bears have to sign in free agency no matter what. The one player you want them to sign, the one key player in free agency. I'll go with you first, Andrew. Let's hear the bold prediction and the one player that they have to sign.
Okay, I'll go with the player that they had to sign first, because I've wanted to talk about this player this entire podcast, and I've been holding my tongue on it. But Javon Hargrave needs to be a Bear in a week here. All right. I get it. He's 30 years old. Maybe he doesn't, quote unquote, fit the timeline of this team as they're rebuilding here, but he's the best interior pass rusher on the market. PFF, we talked about, their free agent list here. They had him rated as, over the last 2 years, I think over the last 3 years, actually, as their 3rd best interior pass rusher behind only Aaron Donald and Chris Jones. 2 guys are going to be Hall of Famers one day. And Hargrave is in that same category in terms of just pass rushing ability over the past few years. So even though he's an older guy at 30 years old, he has shown no sign of slowing down. He's coming off of maybe his best year in his career as a Philadelphia Eagle, and I think he's got a lot in the tank. And for those who want to say that maybe he doesn't fit the timeline because he's an older player, like, the timeline is the 3 years left that you have of rookie contract control over Justin Fields. That's your window for building this team right now. That's the mindset in terms of how they have to build this thing in free agency. How can you maximize the last 2 to 3 years of Justin Fields while we have him for cheap on his rookie deal? Javon Hargrave is the guy that they have to bring in the building. He's the perfect fit for that 3-tech position. He's a great elite pass rusher in the interior. He just checks a lot of boxes that you want. And, if you're going to be trading down and getting a lot of draft capital to maybe get, 3-tech later on in the draft, he's kind of that perfect guy to kind of be a mentor as well to whoever you draft and kind of bring in there as well. So I think he's a guy that just checks so many boxes. He's the top defensive tackle on the market. There's a big gap between him and guys like Jermont Jones, who I have some worries about. Zach Allen, who I'm not sure is the best fit as a 3-tech in this scheme. Like, he just makes the most sense. Like, pay the big bucks, Ryan Poles, bring him in here, and let's upgrade it, and let's get like an actual NFL caliber pass rush here for once here, because they need to get that back. It's an important part of this defense, and just please, if they got Hargrave on day one of free agency, I'd be oh man, I'd be very very pleased with that. In terms of a bold prediction here, oh man, I mean, I guess my bold prediction, I'm not even sure if it's bold. In this sense, this is kind of tough for me because there are so many avenues that the Bears can go in free agency this year. My bold prediction is that we're going to get a trade for the number one overall pick before free agency kicks off. I think that the Bears.
So next week. So within this week.
Within this week. I think we're going to get a trade within this week because.
You know what? I don't mean to interrupt you. You just totally jinxed it because we're recording at 8:44, and by the time I get this up, it's going to be traded.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the way it works out with these things, right? But it makes no sense. It feels like momentum is building for getting a trade done. And I think the Bears want to get a trade done before free agency starts as well, just so that they know what they've got in the draft and free agency. So they know that, okay, we're picking here. This is probably who's going to be available. How does this affect our free agency plan? Who we need to absolutely target there from that standpoint. So I think we're going to see a trade for that number one overall pick within the next week or so. And that'll kind of kickstart this offseason period for the Bears, where they're going to be a lot more busy after that once they get a trade done. So I'm predicting that as my bold prediction.
And you said you can give yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and say that the player that the Bears have to absolutely sign in free agency is going to be linebacker TJ Edwards from the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are kind of going through this like mini roster purge. Some of their guys are going to be free agents. They've got a lot of big money tied up to some of the other names, like an AJ Brown on the roster. So I just think that TJ Edwards is a must-have. He's a local Chicago kid, grew up in the area. It'd be cool to see him come back, and I think that he's just an ideal fit in Matt Eberflus's 4-3 defense. He can play middle linebacker for this team, which quite frankly this team needs. I think bold prediction for free agency is we're going to see the Bears significantly overhaul the defense. And what do I mean by that? Andrew touched on the defensive linemen, guys like Hargrave or even Draymond Jones. I think the Bears, when you look at this linebacker class in free agency, it's pretty strong. You've got guys like Devin Bush from the Steelers. You've got Tremaine Edmonds. Leighton Vander Esch is another name that's played in a 4-3 over the last couple seasons. You've also got TJ Edwards. I think the Bears are going to go ahead and sign a combination of linebackers. And then what's going to happen is you are going to see this team bring in a cornerback too. And in terms of that, there's a couple intriguing names to keep an eye on. You've got guys like Sean Murphy-Bunting. Rock Yassine's only 27 years old. You've got Trey Flowers as well, Trayvon Mullen from the Raiders. So I think what's going to happen is this, right? Is we're going to see the outlook of this defense change significantly. And then kind of looking at the dominoes, what happens is that's going to give the Bears an opportunity to really focus on day 2 and 3 of the draft on just finding quality starters and some quality depth for the offensive side of the ball. Because if I'm looking at the way Ryan Poles is trying to build this thing up, I think I confidently say with how expensive offense is getting in the NFL, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that teams just value having younger rookies and younger players on the offensive side of the ball through the draft and bringing guys in like that compared to just dishing out big contracts for offensive players in free agency.
Yeah, my must-have player. I'm gonna go with Mike McGlinchy at right tackle. I think they have to figure out right tackle one way or the other. And I think, you get a guy that I think fits his scheme, and he's a solid starter from day one. You're going to overpay. He's going to get the money. So be it. I think that's the guy you got to get. I think that makes your line better. I think in a crazy way, maybe not as crazy, maybe to some on Twitter, you get Mike McGlinchey, I think your line could be set right now with Braxton Jones, Cody Whitehair, Patrick Jenkins, and McGlinchey. I think that's a very legit chance there. I don't know if it's going to happen because my bold prediction is I think the Bears are going to go out and sign 2 big offensive tackles right away in free agency. I think they're going to get McGlinchey or Taylor. They're going to get Brown or McGlinchey. any of these combos, I think they're going to spend on that offensive line. We're so focused on the defensive line a lot of times, but I think they're really going to go out and spend on the offensive line a lot. And even if maybe it's not 2 tackles, like I think that'd be my bold one. Excuse me. But if they go out and they try to get like another interior offensive lineman, move on from Cody Whitehair, I think that's possible. The interior offensive line class doesn't really pop as much as the offensive tackles. When you have Taylor, McGarry, McGlinchy, guys like that. Jason Kelsey's a free agent, but he's not, I don't think he's going to go anywhere. Ben Powers is another guy to kind of keep an eye on. God, Nate Davis, but like those names don't pop as much as the tackles. I think they're going to spend a lot of money on the tackles. I kind of wanted to say that Ryan Poles is going to go out and spend good money on an off-ball linebacker, but I don't think that's going to happen. I would love to see, the Bears front 7 be revamped, but I really think they're going to do that during the draft. Like I think that they're going to get, I think Andrew's right. I think they have to get Hargrave. And then kind of go to the draft and revamp that line. But yeah, maybe it's not as bold of a prediction, but I think they're gonna address the tackles big time, and I think that's where most of their money is gonna go because they want to help Justin Fields and protect Justin Fields. Guys, thanks so much again for joining me on this one. It's gonna be a fun week ahead, fun couple weeks ahead. With free agency, we'll try to do one maybe end of March, early April with how free agency is gone. Any of you two have any last free agent thoughts? Anything you want to say before it starts?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there. Andrew already alluded to it, but I do think we are much closer than a lot of people think to seeing a trade for that first overall pick. And I'm going to throw this team out there. I think the Carolina Panthers are going to be the team that the Bears end up trading with. I think you're going to see 2 first-round picks and a player to make that jump from 9th overall to 1st overall. And quite frankly, one of those guys is going to be Brian Burns, which is going to give the Bears so much flexibility when it comes to addressing edge rusher and kind of just continuing to build this thing out.
Now that's a bold take right there. For me, yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of covered a lot here. I just think the main takeaway from this is that the Bears have a ton of options on how they want to build this thing. And, I kind of went over this when writing up my mock off-season series, which I had a lot of fun with for this year. But, man, $100 million in cap space, the ability to trade down and get a haul of draft picks at number 1 overall. I mean, the Ryan Poles can really revamp and reshape this roster in his image in just one offseason here. He really has the potential to do so. It's not a strong free agency class in general, but if you can get a couple of key guys in here, you can really start to get the ball rolling on, kind of getting this team back to just being competent and competitive and hopefully contending in the near future here. So I think, they have to figure out the trenches on both sides of the ball. I think Zach kind of said it well. Like, they have to spend money on that offensive line. They have to spend money and invest in the defensive line as well. But don't be surprised if they go after linebackers on the market. It's a very strong linebacker class. There are some running backs I like in this market as well. If they want to upgrade David Montgomery, do they sign Saquon Barkley for a ton of money? Who knows? I mean, we'll see there. You say kind of covered it as well, but I'm not a huge fan of spending that much money on a running back. But yeah, I mean, the biggest takeaway for me is that, man, that there's a lot of excitement here just of when you look at all the players available, all the money they can spend. And I'm just looking forward to it, man. We have a week left, kind of counting down the days here. And, man, it's going to be a lot of fun next week when we get to see actual news being reported on who's going where, because there's a lot of speculation going on right now. There's a lot of scenarios going on in my head about what's going to happen, and I just can't wait for it to start.
Yeah, I'm with you. I disagree. I think the trade won't come until later on this month. I think it's going to be end of March, maybe second to last week. Like, I want to say in each of the last 3 to 4 years, a big trade has come right during like the first or second round of the NCAA tournament. Like, I think Devontae Adams was last year during that St. Peter's, Kentucky game. The year before, there was a big trade, I thought, during the tournament. So maybe during then, I don't know. Either way, I mean, it's going to happen. I'd be shocked if it didn't, especially with all the national reports coming out. But yeah, it's an exciting time. I can't wait for next week. And we'll leave it off with this. You can follow the Bear Report on Twitter at just Bear Report. Please rate, review, and subscribe on all major podcasting platforms. Bear Report Podcast, Picks for Polls. Andrew, where can everyone follow you on Twitter at?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at AJFreeman25. You can find my work on the Bear Report as well. Just really looking forward to getting to the groove of this offseason and covering a lot of the news going on there. Also looking forward to getting some scouting reports done for the Bear Report. We're preparing for the draft at Picks for Polls, so make sure to follow us at Picks for Polls. At Picks for Polls as well if you want to follow our podcast there. Really looking forward to this draft season, and we have a lot of content coming up ahead. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
And then you say where can everyone follow you on Twitter at?
Yeah, guys, you can follow me on Twitter at Usaid Koshal. Also, we are going to start posting to TikTok again, so go follow us on there at Shy Bear Report. A lot of, fun short videos coming up for that too. So just make sure you've followed us on every social media platform.
Yes, till next time, everyone, please stay safe.